March 4, 1944. 30,000 feet above Berlin, Lieutenant James Morrison can barely feel his fingers inside his leather gloves as he leans over the Norden Bombsight, his breath freezing instantly inside his oxygen mask. The B-17's nose section is a frozen hell at -40 degrees, every metal surface coated with frost. But Morrison's focus remains locked on the telescope eyepiece, where a German ball bearing factory sits 6 miles below, workers moving between buildings completely unaware of what's coming. In 47 seconds, a 500-pound bomb will fall through a specific window of that factory. The Germans called this impossible. Their best Luftwaffe engineers laughed when intelligence reports claimed American bombers could hit individual buildings from this altitude. But Morrison's trembling hands rest on 50 pounds of brass gears and gyroscopes that will prove them catastrophically wrong. The device Morrison is operating cost $8,000 to build, more than the average American family earned in 5 years, more than some of the bombs his B-17 carries. It's so classified that Morrison had to swear an oath threatening him with 10 years in military prison if he allows it to fall into enemy hands. A thermite grenade sits within arm's reach, ready to melt this mechanical marvel into unrecognizable slag if the aircraft goes down. The Germans have been hunting for an intact example of this device for 2 years, offering massive rewards, sending special recovery teams racing to bomber crash sites, even ordering Luftwaffe pilots to force American bombers down intact rather than destroying them outright. What makes this 50-pound box of precision machinery so valuable that grown men will die rather than let enemies capture it? The answer lies in what's about to happen over Berlin in the next 3 minutes. Through his telescope, Morrison watches the aiming point, a specific smokestack at the Schweinfurt ball-bearing plant that Allied intelligence has identified as the center of a facility producing critical components for German tanks and aircraft. The Norden is calculating in real time, its gyroscopes spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute to maintain perfect level regardless of the bomber's movements. Its mechanical computer solving ballistic equations that would take a human mathematician several minutes with pencil and paper. Morrison's hands aren't actually controlling the aircraft anymore. The Norden has taken over through its connection to the autopilot, making tiny steering corrections that the pilot in the cockpit 40 feet behind can feel but not override. For these critical minutes of the bombing run, a machine is flying this B-17, and every man aboard knows it. The flak starts exactly when Morrison expects it. Black puffs of smoke appearing around the formation as German 88mm guns find their range. The explosions shake the bomber, fragments rattling against the fuselage like hail on a tin roof, but Morrison keeps the crosshairs centered on that smokestack. His training instructor's voice echoes in his memory from bombing school in New Mexico. If fighters attack, keep tracking. If flak hits you, keep tracking. If the aircraft is on fire, keep tracking until the bombs are away. 3 B-17s in the formation have already taken hits, one trailing smoke from its No. 3 engine, another with its nose section shattered by a direct hit that killed the bombardier instantly. Morrison can see the crippled bomber falling away below, its crew bailing out into the frozen sky, but he cannot think about that now. The Norden's calculations are reaching their conclusion, the mechanical computer determining the exact millisecond when bombs must be released to hit the target. Morrison doesn't press the release button.
He doesn't need to. The Norden does it automatically, sending an electrical signal to the bomb bay at the mathematically perfect instant. Morrison feels the bomber lurch upward slightly as 4,000 pounds of high explosive drop away. Then he's watching through his telescope as the bombs fall, small dark shapes shrinking toward the factory below. The Germans never see them coming. At 30,000 feet, the bombers are invisible to the naked eye, just contrails against the blue sky, and the bombs themselves are silent as they fall. Morrison counts the seconds, 28, 29, 30, and then the factory erupts in a sequence of explosions that his telescope captures in horrifying detail. The first bomb enters through the roof of the main production hall, exactly as planned. The second and third strike adjacent buildings. The fourth hits the power plant. Within seconds, a facility that took years to build and employed hundreds of skilled workers is transformed into burning wreckage. This is precision bombing, the revolutionary concept that the Norden Bombsight has made possible. Not area bombing, where entire cities are set ablaze in hopes of hitting something important. Not the random destruction that characterized early attempts at strategic bombing, but surgical strikes against specific industrial targets that cripple an enemy's ability to wage war. The smoke rising from the Schweinfurt plant represents more than just one factory destroyed. It represents the culmination of a 15-year development program that cost over $1.5 billion, a security apparatus so elaborate that it rivaled the Manhattan Project, and a training program that washed out half of all candidates. The device that made this possible, the Norden Mark 15 bombsight, would become the most classified military technology of World War II. More closely guarded than early radar systems, more expensive than entire aircraft carriers, and more feared by the Germans than almost any other American weapon. As Morrison's B-17 turns away from the target, he disconnects the Norden from the autopilot and begins the process of safing the device for the long flight back to England. Around him, the formation has already lost 3 bombers to flak and fighters, their crews dead or captured or freezing to death as they parachute toward German territory. Morrison knows that if his aircraft goes down, his first duty before bailing out is to destroy the Norden with that thermite grenade, even if it means sacrificing seconds that could save his life. Some bombardiers have died doing exactly that, choosing to ensure the device's destruction rather than risk it falling into German hands intact. This isn't just military hardware. This is America's secret weapon in the skies over Europe, the technological edge that's allowing the 8th Air Force to systematically dismantle German industry, one precision strike at a time. The Germans, watching from the ground, see the American formation disappearing toward the west, leaving behind burning factories and hundreds of casualties, and they still don't fully understand how the Americans are achieving this accuracy. German bomb sights can't match it. Their best optical instruments, their most sophisticated calculating devices, their most experienced bombardiers cannot consistently hit targets from 30,000 feet. The Luftwaffe has tried everything, captured aircrew interrogations that reveal nothing useful, crashed bomber examinations that find only melted slag where the bomb site should be, even pre-war espionage that provided outdated information about early prototypes. The Americans have achieved something the Germans thought impossible, transforming high-altitude bombing from an exercise in futility into a precision weapon that's winning the war. But the Norden story doesn't begin over Germany in 1944. It begins in the 1920s with a Dutch engineer's obsession, continues through a development program that pushed analog computing to its absolute limits, and includes security measures so extreme that they bordered on paranoia. The device Morrison is operating is the product of thousands of hours of design work, millions of dollars in research funding, and innovations in mechanical engineering that wouldn't be matched until the digital age. It's an analog computer built with 1930s technology that can solve real-time ballistic equations while being shaken by turbulence, frozen by sub-zero temperatures, and operated by men who are exhausted, frightened, and August 1942. Captain Robert Morgan stands in the briefing room at Polebrook Air Base in England, staring at reconnaissance photos of the submarine pens at Saint-Nazaire, France, and he's trying to understand how his B-17 crew is supposed to hit this target. The photos show massive concrete structures built by the Germans to shelter U-boats, roofs 20 feet thick that can withstand anything short of a direct hit by the heaviest bombs. Intelligence officers are telling him that precision is critical, that bombs must enter through the relatively thin side openings or hit supply buildings adjacent to the pens, because bombing the roofs themselves is pointless. Morgan does the math in his head. Flying at 25,000 feet to stay above most of the flak, in a bomber traveling at 180 miles per hour, trying to drop bombs that will hit a target maybe 100 feet wide. The problem isn't courage or determination. The problem is physics. And Morgan knows from previous missions that standard bomb sights simply cannot deliver the accuracy this mission requires. The 8th Air Force has been in England for only 3 months, and already the brutal reality of high-altitude precision bombing is becoming apparent to everyone from pilots to generals. The theory sounds perfect in briefing rooms back in Washington. B-17 flying fortresses will climb above the effective range of most anti-aircraft guns, form up in massive formations for mutual defense against fighters, and use their Sperry or Norden bombsights to hit strategic targets with unprecedented accuracy. But theory collides with reality over occupied Europe, where weather is terrible 2/3 of the time. German flak is far more effective than intelligence predicted, and Luftwaffe fighters are more aggressive than anyone anticipated. Captain Howard Hamilton of the 91st Bomb Group keeps a personal log of his missions, noting bombing results with increasing frustration. Mission to Lille, September 9th. Scattered bombs across 3 square miles, may have hit the rail yards. Mission to Ramoli, September 26th. Cloud cover prevented visual bombing. Dropped on estimated position. Mission to Lorient, October 21st. Intense flak forced evasive action. No observed hits on submarine pens. The fundamental problem facing American bombardiers in 1942 is that bombing from high altitude requires solving an impossibly complex physics equation in real time while someone is actively trying to kill you. A bomb dropped from a B-17 at 25,000 feet takes approximately 30 seconds to reach the ground, during which time the wind at altitude pushes it sideways. The bomber's forward velocity carries it forward, and gravity pulls it down in a parabolic arc. The bombardier must account for altitude, airspeed, wind direction, air temperature, barometric pressure, and the ballistic characteristics of the specific bomb type being dropped. Even small errors in any of these variables translate to bombs landing hundreds of feet from the aiming point.
Lieutenant Charles Cruikshank, a bombardier with the 306th Bomb Group, describes the challenge in a letter home to his family in Michigan. Imagine trying to throw a baseball from a speeding car into a bucket 6 miles away while the wind is blowing and someone is shooting at you. That's what we're doing every time we go up. The standard bomb sights available to the 8th Air Force in early 1942 are adequate for area bombing, but hopeless for precision work. The Sperry S-1 sight, which many B-17s carry as backup, requires the bombardier to manually track the target, manually adjust for wind drift, and manually release the bombs at what he hopes is the correct moment. Human reaction time alone introduces errors of a quarter second or more, which at 180 miles per hour means bombs landing 70 feet from the calculated impact point even if everything else is perfect. The British, who have been bombing Germany since 1939, have already concluded that precision bombing is impossible under combat conditions and have switched to area bombing at night, setting entire cities ablaze in hopes that the fires will consume war industries along with everything else. Air Marshal Arthur Harris of RAF Bomber Command states bluntly in classified communications that the Americans are wasting their time trying to hit specific factories, that the only effective strategy is to destroy German cities wholesale until the enemy's will to fight collapses. But the Americans are philosophically and practically committed to daylight precision bombing for reasons that go beyond mere stubbornness. First, the United States Army Air Forces has spent years developing doctrine around the concept of strategic bombing, hitting an enemy's industrial capacity rather than their cities, and abandoning this doctrine would mean admitting that years of planning and billions in spending were wasted. Second, American B-17s and B-24s are designed for high-altitude daylight operations, with heavy defensive armament and armor protection that makes them suitable for fighting through to targets in daylight, but also makes them too heavy and fuel inefficient for long-range night operations. Third, and perhaps most importantly, American public opinion and international law increasingly frown on indiscriminate bombing of cities. President Roosevelt has publicly committed to avoiding civilian casualties whenever possible, and the Army Air Forces understands that mass civilian deaths will create political problems that could undermine support for the bombing campaign. This creates an impossible situation. The Americans must achieve precision they cannot deliver, using equipment and tactics that are proving inadequate, against an enemy who is adapting rapidly to counter their attacks. General Ira Eaker, commanding the 8th Air Force, finds himself caught between strategic necessity and tactical reality. His superiors in Washington expect results, expect proof that daylight precision bombing works, expect industrial targets destroyed with minimal collateral damage. But his crews are dying in burning bombers over Europe, and the targets they're hitting, when they hit them at all, are not being destroyed thoroughly enough to justify the losses. In October 1942, after a particularly costly mission to Lille, Eaker writes in his private diary that unless bombing accuracy improves dramatically, the entire strategic bombing campaign may be unsustainable. The losses we're taking might be acceptable if we were destroying targets, but we're not destroying them. We're hitting near them, and near isn't good enough. The naval problem is even worse than what the Army Air Forces faces over Europe. The U.S. Navy has been trying to develop effective bombing tactics against ships since the 1920s, recognizing that air power could potentially make battleships obsolete if aircraft could reliably sink them. But hitting moving ships from altitude proves even harder than hitting stationary factories. Ships can see bombers approaching from miles away and begin evasive maneuvers, turning hard and changing speed to throw off bombing calculations. The ocean provides no landmarks for bombardiers to use in calculating wind drift and ground speed. And ships have concentrated anti-aircraft defenses that can put up a curtain of fire that no bomber wants to fly through. Pre-war exercises consistently showed that hitting a maneuvering warship from 10,000 feet or higher required an average of 100 bombs, making it economically impossible to sink battleships through bombing. This is where Carl Norden enters the story, not as a wartime inventor rushing to solve an immediate crisis, but as an engineer who has been working on this problem since 1923. Norden is a Dutch immigrant who served briefly in the U.S. Navy during World War I as a consultant on naval aviation, and he became obsessed with the bombing accuracy problem. He believed, perhaps naively, that bombing could be made accurate enough wars would become too costly to fight, that the ability to destroy specific military targets while sparing civilians would make warfare more humane and therefore less frequent. The Navy, more pragmatic, simply wanted a bombsight that could hit ships, and they gave Norden funding to develop one. What Norden created over 15 years of work was not just an improved bombsight, but a revolution in mechanical computation, a device that could solve real-time ballistic equations faster and more accurately than any human. By 1938, Norden had perfected the Mark XV, the production version that would become standard equipment on American heavy bombers. The device looked deceptively simple, a 50-pound collection of brass gears, mirrors, and a telescope. But inside that metal housing was the most sophisticated analog computer ever built. It used a gyroscope system to maintain perfect stabilization regardless of aircraft movement. It employed a mechanical computer using gears and cams to solve trajectory equations in real time.
Staff Sergeant Tom Mitchell stands in the maintenance hangar at Kimballton Air Base, holding what looks like a 50-pound box of brass and steel. Except this box costs more than his childhood home in Pennsylvania and contains secrets that could get him court-martialed just for looking at it the wrong way. He's one of the specialized technicians trained to service Norden bombsights, and even after 6 months of working on these devices, he's still amazed by what's packed into this relatively small package. Through a maintenance access panel, he can see hundreds of precision-machined gears, some no larger than a dime, all cut to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. There's a gyroscope assembly spinning at over 8,000 revolutions per minute, stabilized by electric motors that must maintain perfect balance. There are mechanical computers using cams and differential gears to solve ballistic equations that would take a mathematician with a slide rule several minutes to calculate. And somehow, all of this has to work at minus 40 degrees while being shaken by turbulence and shot at by Germans. The heart of the Norden is its stabilization system, and understanding how it works requires understanding gyroscopes. Mitchell remembers his instructor at Aberdeen Proving Ground explaining it with a bicycle wheel. Spin a bicycle wheel fast enough and try to tilt it, and the wheel resists the motion, wanting to maintain its original orientation. Scale that principle up, add precision bearings, electric motors, and a complex gimbal system, and you have the Norden's gyroscope assembly. The gyro spins constantly once powered up, maintaining a perfectly level reference plane, regardless of whether the bomber is banking 30 degrees in a turn or bouncing through turbulence. The bombsight's telescope and sighting mechanisms are mounted on this gyro-stabilized platform, meaning the bombardier is looking through an instrument that's mathematically level with the Earth, even when the aircraft around him is tilted and shaking. This alone was revolutionary in 1935 when Norden perfected it, giving bombardiers a steady aiming platform for the first time. But stabilization is just the foundation. The real genius lies in the mechanical computer that calculates bombing solutions in real time. Lieutenant Paul Henderson, a bombardier with the 384th Bomb Group, explains the setup process to new replacements arriving at Grafton Underwood. Before the bomb run, he inputs several pieces of critical data into the Norden. First,
altitude from the aircraft's altimeter. Second, indicated airspeed. Third, the bomb type, selected by rotating a dial that physically changes the shape of mechanical cams inside the computer. Each bomb type has different ballistic characteristics. A 500-pound general-purpose bomb falls differently than a 1,000-pound armor-piercing bomb. And the Norden has ballistic profiles for dozens of different munitions literally built into its mechanical structure. When Henderson sets the bomb type dial to 500-pound GP, he's physically positioning cams that will modify how the computer calculates the trajectory. Once the initial data is set, the real magic begins as the bomber approaches the target. Henderson looks through the telescope and centers the crosshairs on the aiming point, a specific building or structure that intelligence has designated as the center of the target. But he's not just aiming. He's teaching the Norden about the bombing problem. As the target moves through his field of view, the bombsight is measuring how fast it appears to move, calculating the bomber's actual ground speed. This is critical because ground speed can be dramatically different from airspeed due to wind. A B-17 indicating 180 miles per hour airspeed might only be moving at 140 miles per hour over the ground if flying into a strong headwind. Or it might be moving at 220 miles per hour with a tailwind. The Norden measures this by timing how long it takes for the target to move across precise angular markings in the telescope, essentially using trigonometry to determine true ground speed without needing any external reference. The device also detects wind drift through a similar process. If there's a crosswind pushing the bomber sideways, the target will appear to drift across the field of view, even when Henderson keeps the crosshairs centered. The Norden measures this drift rate and calculates both wind speed and direction, information that's crucial for predicting where bombs will land after being released. These calculations are happening continuously through mechanical computation, gears turning against cams, differential mechanisms solving equations, all of it powered by electric motors and synchronized by the spinning gyroscope. Henderson describes it as like having a mathematician sitting in the nose calculating on paper, except this mechanical mathematician works faster and doesn't make arithmetic errors even when flak is exploding nearby. But the Norden's most revolutionary feature, the one that makes German engineers weep when they examine captured examples, is the autopilot integration. Traditional bomb sights calculate the release point and tell the bombardier when to press the button, but human reaction time introduces errors. The Norden eliminates this by taking control of the aircraft during the final bombing run. Through electrical connections to the bomber's autopilot system, the bombsight can make steering corrections, adjusting the aircraft's heading to account for drift and ensuring a perfect approach to the release point. Captain Frank Murphy, piloting a B-17 named Texas Tornado, describes the sensation of giving up control to the bombsight. You feel these gentle corrections through the control yoke, little nudges left or right, and you know it's the Norden flying your aircraft now. It's unsettling as hell the first few times, letting a machine take over when fighters are attacking and flak is bursting around you. But you learn to trust it, because it's better at holding steady course than any human pilot. The automatic release mechanism completes the system. When the Norden's calculations indicate the mathematically perfect moment for release, the device sends an electrical signal directly to the bomb bay release mechanism. The bombardier doesn't press anything. He just keeps the crosshairs on target and waits for the Norden to drop the bombs at the exact right instant. This eliminates the quarter-second reaction time delay that plagued manual releases, meaning bombs release exactly when physics says they should to hit the target. The bombardier's job during the run is purely to maintain aim, keeping those crosshairs centered while the Norden handles everything else: the course corrections, the ballistic calculations, the release timing. It's a partnership between human and machine that wouldn't be seen again until modern fly-by-wire aircraft. The precision required to manufacture these devices staggers anyone who sees the production process. At a secure factory in New York, workers who've passed extensive background checks assemble Nordens under conditions more like watchmaking than aircraft production. Each Norden contains over 2,000 individual parts. The gears must be cut to tolerances of 2/1000ths of an inch, close enough that temperature changes can affect their fit. The gyroscope bearings use specially selected steel that's been heat-treated to specific hardness, then polished to mirror smoothness. The optics are ground by hand, checked repeatedly for aberrations that might throw off a bombardier's aim. A single Norden takes approximately 150 man-hours to assemble, with specialized technicians handling subsystems, and every completed unit goes through extensive testing before being accepted for military service. The maintenance requirements are equally demanding. Sergeant Mitchell's job involves more than just cleaning and lubricating. He must check gyroscope spin rates with precision instruments, ensure that the stabilization platform levels perfectly within 1/10 of a degree, verify that gear trains operate smoothly without binding, and test the electrical systems that power the motors and control the autopilot connections. In the cold and damp of English winters, moisture can seep into mechanisms and cause corrosion. Oil and grease can thicken in the cold, making gears sluggish. Mitchell and his fellow technicians sometimes work through the night before a mission, warming Nordens in heated tents, testing and retesting to ensure everything operates perfectly. They know that mechanical failure during a bombing run doesn't just mean missing the target. It can mean the bomber has to break formation to make another pass, becoming isolated and vulnerable to fighters. The Norden also has limitations that become apparent in combat, though they're not generally discussed in the promotional materials or training films. It requires visual contact with the target, making it useless when clouds obscure the ground. It needs several minutes of straight and level flight for accurate bombing, creating a predictable vulnerability that German fighters exploit mercilessly. The gyroscope takes time to spin up to operating speed, meaning the bombsight must be powered on well before reaching the target. And despite all its sophistication, the Norden can only work with the information it receives. If the bombardier inputs incorrect altitude, or the airspeed indicator is giving false readings due to pitot tube icing, the calculations will be wrong no matter how perfect the mechanical computation. It's a precision instrument that requires precision input.
May 15, 1943. Bombardier School, Deming Army Airfield, New Mexico. Second Lieutenant Richard Anderson stands at attention in the sweltering desert heat, his right hand raised, about to swear an oath that carries more weight than his original enlistment. The oath, specifically for the Norden Bombsight, crafted by military lawyers and intelligence officers who understood exactly what was at stake. Anderson's voice joins 53 other graduates as they recite the words together. I do solemnly swear that I will keep secret all information concerning the Norden Bombsight entrusted to me, that I will destroy the bombsight rather than permit it to fall into enemy hands, that I understand the penalty for violation of this oath is imprisonment for 10 years and a fine of $10,000. The base commander watches from the platform, knowing that some of these young men will keep this oath at the cost of their lives, choosing to destroy the Norden even when those extra seconds spent pulling the thermite grenade pin could mean the difference between escape and death. The security protocols surrounding the Norden make atomic bomb security look casual by comparison. At every operational base in England, North Africa, and later Italy, specially constructed vaults house the bomb sites overnight. These aren't simple locked rooms, but reinforced concrete structures with steel doors, combination locks that only designated officers know, and armed guards posted 24 hours a day. Technical Sergeant Ray Whitmore pulls vault duty at Thorpe Abbotts and describes the procedure in a letter to his brother.
Every evening, after the last mission, ground crew remove the Nordens from the bombers, each one signed out personally by the bombardier who flew it. We carry them in canvas bags so nobody can see what they are, even though everyone on the base knows. The bags go into the vault, we log them, lock up, and then I spend 12 hours making sure nobody gets near that door. The next morning, the whole process reverses. Bombardiers sign for their devices, and armed guards escort them to the aircraft. The thermite grenade system represents the ultimate security measure, insurance that even if everything else fails, the Norden will not fall into enemy hands intact. Every B-17 and B-24 carries a special incendiary grenade mounted within reach of the bombardier. A canister filled with thermite compound that burns at over 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt through armor plate. Lieutenant Robert Femoyer, bombardier on the B-17 Heaven Can Wait, goes through the emergency destruction drill so many times in training that it becomes automatic. If we're going down and I can't bail out immediately, I pull this pin, place the grenade on top of the Norden, and I have 5 seconds to get out before it lights off. The thermite will melt through the bomb site in about 8 seconds, turning precision gears and gyroscopes into an unrecognizable blob of slag. Instructors make it clear that activating the grenade takes priority over almost everything except getting wounded crew members out of the aircraft. Some bombardiers don't make it out in time, choosing to ensure destruction of the Norden rather than save those critical seconds for themselves. On November 2, 1944, over Mersburg, Germany, Femnayer's B-17 takes catastrophic damage from flak. The aircraft is breaking apart, fire spreading through the fuselage, and the pilot gives the order to bail out. Femoyer is already wounded from flak fragments, but witnesses see him positioning the thermite grenade on the Norden before attempting to escape. He dies either from his wounds or from lack of oxygen before reaching the ground. His posthumous Medal of Honor citation specifically mentions his dedication to destroying the bomb site, understanding that protecting this device was as important as any other combat action. German recovery teams reaching the wreckage find only melted metal where the bomb site should have been. German intelligence knows about the thermite protocol and tries desperately to counter it. Luftwaffe pilots receive specific instructions to shoot out engines rather than fuel tanks, trying to force bombers to crash land relatively intact rather than explode in mid-air. Wehrmacht units stationed in occupied territories are trained to recognize American bomber types and to rush to crash sites immediately. Special recovery teams wait on standby with radio-equipped vehicles, ready to race to any reported bomber crash. They're searching for those rare cases where the thermite grenade malfunctions, where the bombardier is killed before he can activate it, or where the crash impact throws the grenade away from the bomb site before it can do its work. German intelligence files captured after the war show lists of every reported B-17 and B-24 crash, each one investigated, each wreckage site examined, searching desperately for an intact Norden. The training to operate the Norden is as intensive as the security surrounding it. Anderson's path to those graduation oath ceremonies began 6 months earlier at pre-flight school in San Antonio, where 200 aviation cadets started training for potential bombardier positions. The washout rate begins immediately as instructors test for the specific skills bombardiers need. Visual acuity good enough to identify targets from 6 miles up, mechanical aptitude to understand complex instruments, mathematical ability to grasp ballistic principles, psychological stability to function under extreme stress. By the time Anderson's class reaches Deming for specialized bombardier training, only 104 of the original 200 remain. The rest have washed out, been reassigned to other positions, or in some cases quit under the pressure. The actual bombardier training at Deming lasts 12 weeks and is divided into phases that build from basic principles to combat-ready skills. Anderson learns bombing theory in classrooms, where instructors use mathematics and physics to explain why bombs fall the way they do. He spends hours in ground-based trainers, mock-up bomber nose sections with Nordens installed, practicing the setup procedures until he can input altitude, airspeed, and bomb type data by feel in complete darkness. The instructors emphasize that in combat, he might be working by flashlight with damaged instruments, perhaps wounded, certainly cold and frightened, and the setup still has to be perfect because the Norden can only calculate accurately with accurate inputs. Mistakes in setup mean bombs landing in the wrong place, potentially killing friendly troops or civilians instead of hitting military targets. The practical training happens over bombing ranges in the New Mexico desert, white circles painted on the ground that bombardiers must hit with small practice bombs. Anderson's first training flights are from 10,000 feet in perfect weather, gentle introductions to the real thing. Even under these ideal conditions, his first bombs miss by 300 feet. His instructor, a combat veteran who survived 30 missions over Europe, is patient but firm. You're not tracking smoothly. You're letting the target drift out of the crosshairs. In combat, you won't have perfect weather or unlimited time. You'll have one chance to get it right, and if you miss, good men might die coming back to try again. The practice missions gradually increase in difficulty. Higher altitudes, time pressure, simulated emergencies. By his 20th training flight, Anderson is hitting within 200 feet consistently, but the instructors make clear that combat conditions will degrade everyone's accuracy. The psychological pressure of training eliminates as many candidates as lack of technical skill. Anderson watches classmates quit, unable to handle the responsibility of knowing that their accuracy or lack thereof will determine whether missions succeed or fail. Others wash out because they can't master the Norden's complexity under time pressure. The device has dozens of knobs, dials, and adjustments, each one critical to the bombing solution, and combat will require setting everything up perfectly while fighters attack and flak explodes nearby. One cadet freezes during a practice mission when the instructor simulates battle damage by cutting power to the Norden's gyroscope. The cadet panics, unable to troubleshoot the problem, and that's the end of his bombardier career. The instructors have no tolerance for panic, because panic in combat means death. Those who graduate, like Anderson, receive their bombardier wings and commissions as second lieutenants, making them officers in an era when most aircrew are enlisted men. The Army Air Forces made bombardiers officers because they believed the responsibility of operating the Norden required officer-level judgment. A bombardier must decide whether conditions allow accurate bombing, whether to bomb through clouds risking civilian casualties, whether to make another pass through flak for a better solution. These are life-and-death decisions affecting not just the crew, but potentially thousands of people on the ground. The officer status also provides some protection if captured. October 9, 1943. 27,000 feet over Marienburg, East Prussia. Lieutenant Richard Anderson experiences the Norden's finest hour, the moment when everything the training promised actually comes true. Through his telescope, he watches the Focke-Wulf aircraft factory complex sprawl across his field of view, the target so clear he can see individual buildings, smokestacks, even the rail lines feeding into the facility. Weather is perfect, ceiling unlimited, visibility 15 miles. No fighter attacks at the moment, and the flak is moderate but inaccurate, bursting 2,000 feet below the formation. Anderson has 3 minutes of ideal bombing conditions, the kind that exist maybe one mission in 20. His hands are steady on the Norden despite the cold. The crosshairs center on the main assembly hall exactly as briefed. The bombsight is calculating flawlessly, its gyroscopes humming, its mechanical computer solving the ballistic equation with precision. At exactly the right instant, Anderson feels the bomber lurch as 4,000 pounds of bombs drop away. 31 seconds later, the bombs arrive. Anderson watches through his telescope as the first 500-pounder punches through the roof of the main assembly hall, followed by 3 more in rapid succession. The building seems to ripple, then the roof collapses inward as internal explosions tear through the structure. The adjacent buildings take hits, the power plant erupts in flames, and the whole complex disappears under smoke and debris. Post-strike reconnaissance photos will show that Anderson's bombs landed within 150 feet of the aiming point, destroying or severely damaging 80% of the facility's production capacity. This is the Norden working exactly as designed. Precision bombing that surgical strike doctrine promised. Anderson's crew celebrates on the way home, certain they've just participated in something that will shorten the war. What they don't know is that this kind of success represents the absolute peak of what the Norden can achieve, conditions that rarely exist in the brutal reality of combat over Europe. 3 weeks later, Anderson is back over Germany, this time targeting synthetic oil refineries at Luna. The mission is a nightmare from the start. Cloud layers obscure the target until the formation is almost on top of it, leaving no time for careful setup. When the clouds finally break, Anderson has less than 60 seconds to acquire the target, input data, and let the Norden calculate. Worse, German fighters have been hitting the formation for 30 minutes. 2 B-17s from Anderson's group are already down, spinning toward Earth trailing smoke and scattered parachutes. The flak starts exactly when the clouds break, German gunners waiting for that moment, knowing the bombers must fly straight now to bomb visually. Anderson tries to keep his crosshairs centered on what he thinks is the main refinery complex, but the bomber is bouncing from near-miss flak bursts. The pilot is trying to hold steady, but also trying to live, small evasive movements that throw off Anderson's aim. The Norden releases automatically, but Anderson knows immediately the solution was bad. He couldn't track smoothly, couldn't get accurate ground speed data, couldn't even confirm he was aimed at the right part of the target complex. Reconnaissance photos the next day show his bombs, and those of most of the formation, scattered across 2 square miles of countryside. Some hit the refinery, some hit farms, some hit nothing but empty fields. This is combat reality for the Norden, where weather, enemy action, and human limits combine to degrade the device's theoretical capabilities. Anderson's bombing accuracy report for this mission reads circular error probable 1,800 feet, far from the 200 feet the training promised. The Norden worked perfectly, calculating exactly what Anderson told it to calculate, but garbage data in means garbage bombs out. The device cannot compensate for a bombardier who's terrified, freezing, and working with less than a minute to set up. Captain Frank Murphy, piloting a B-17 called Memphis Belle on her final mission to Lorient, experiences another common problem. His bombardier has the target acquired, the Norden is set up perfectly, and they're on the bomb run with 2 minutes to release. Then a wave of FW-190 fighters hits the formation head-on, 20mm cannons firing. Murphy has to choose, maintain straight and level flight and probably get shot down, or break formation and abort the bombing run. He breaks left, hauling the bomber into a steep bank to avoid the fighter stream. The Norden, still connected to the autopilot, tries to correct back to course, fighting Murphy's inputs. The bombardier is screaming that he's lost the target, the gyroscope tumbling from the violent maneuver. By the time Murphy levels out and the bombardier reacquires, they're off course and separated from the formation. They bomb anyway, but Murphy knows the bombs went nowhere near the aiming point. The Norden can't account for a pilot choosing survival over accuracy. The weather over Europe proves to be the Norden's greatest enemy, even more than German defenses. Lieutenant David Williams, bombardier with the 456th Bomb Group, keeps a personal log of his missions. Of his first 25 missions, only 8 feature weather clear enough for visual bombing. The other 17 are either complete weather aborts, where the formation returns with bombs still in the racks, or missions where they bomb through clouds using dead reckoning or radar, methods that render the Norden useless. Williams describes the frustration in a letter home. "We flew 6 hours today, got shot at by flak over France, watched 2 ships go down to fighters, finally reached the target, and there's nothing but solid clouds from 15,000 feet down. We could hear the city down there, but we couldn't see it. We dropped anyway. Radar said we were over the target, but who knows where the bombs actually went. The Norden just sits there useless when you can't see the ground." German flak gunners learned to exploit the Norden's need for straight and level flight. Hauptmann Klaus Zimmermann, commanding an 88mm flak battery near Schweinfurt, briefs his crews specifically on American bombing tactics. They must fly straight for at least 2 minutes before bomb release. That's when we concentrate fire. Ignore the evasive ships, ignore the ones turning away. Put everything on the ones holding steady course because those are the ones about to bomb. German fire control radar can predict where a bomber flying steady course will be in 30 seconds, allowing the guns to put flak exactly where the bomber is going, rather than where it's been. Zimmermann's battery records show they achieve 3 times as many hits during American bombing runs compared to approaches. The Norden's strength, requiring steady flight for accurate bombing, becomes a deadly vulnerability that costs hundreds of crews their lives. The human factor degrades Norden accuracy as much as weather or enemy action. Anderson watches this happen to his own performance over his combat tour. His first 10 missions show consistent accuracy, averaging around 400 feet circular error probable. By mission 20, he's averaging 800 feet. By mission 30, over 1,000 feet. He's not getting worse at operating the Norden, he's accumulating combat fatigue. The cold affects him more than it did before. His hands shake when they didn't before, and he finds it harder to concentrate during the critical minutes of the bomb run. His reaction to flak has changed from focused determination to barely controlled terror. He still does his job, still sets up the Norden and aims at targets, but the edge is gone. The medical officer recognizes combat fatigue and recommends Anderson for rotation back to the States after 35 missions, noting that his effectiveness has deteriorated despite no loss of technical skill. Yet despite all these limitations, despite the gap between training range accuracy and combat reality, the Norden does accomplish something strategically significant. By late 1944, sustained precision bombing has severely damaged German industrial capacity in ways that area bombing could not have. The ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt produced 30% less than before the bombing began. Synthetic oil refineries operate at 60% capacity because precision attacks have destroyed critical components that area bombing would have missed. Aircraft factories that once produced 1,000 fighters per month now struggle to produce 600. These are cumulative effects, the result of thousands of missions where bombardiers like Anderson used their Nordens to hit specific buildings within factory complexes. The accuracy wasn't perfect, often wasn't even good, but it was better than anything Germany or Britain or Japan could achieve. That advantage, multiplied across 2 years of bombing, makes a difference that German production records document clearly. The final assessment of Norden performance comes from the United States Strategic Bombing Survey, teams of analysts who examined bombing effectiveness after the war ended. Their report, partially classified for decades because it contradicted the public narrative so thoroughly, concluded that average bombing accuracy in combat was approximately 1,200 feet from the aiming point under all conditions. This included perfect missions like Anderson's Marienburg strike and disasters where bombs fell miles from targets. Only about 20% of bombs dropped landed within 1,000 feet of their intended targets.
January 15, 1944. Outside Magdeburg, Germany. Oberleutnant Werner Schroeder's recovery team arrives at the crash site of a B-17 within 20 minutes of impact, racing across frozen fields in their truck, knowing that every second counts. The bomber came down in a relatively controlled crash landing, the pilot managing to keep wings level until the last moment, and most of the fuselage is intact. Schroeder can see bodies scattered around the wreckage, some crew members who didn't survive the crash, others who bailed out successfully, now prisoners being rounded up by Wehrmacht infantry. But Schroeder's only concern is the nose section, where the bomb sight should be. His team wears his bestest gloves because they know about the thermite grenades, know that touching certain areas of a crashed American bomber can mean severe burns. They approach the shattered plexiglass nose carefully, peering inside with flashlights. Schroeder's heart sinks. The bombardier's position is a charred mess, the distinctive smell of burned thermite compound filling the air. Another melted Norden, another failure for German intelligence. German obsession with capturing an intact Norden begins in late 1942, when reconnaissance photos and intelligence reports make clear that American bombing accuracy exceeds anything the Luftwaffe can achieve. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring personally orders the establishment of special recovery units whose sole mission is reaching crashed American bombers before the thermite grenades can destroy the bomb sites. Göring understands that technological superiority can shift entire wars, having watched Germany lose its early advantage in fighters as American and British designs improved. He tells his intelligence staff that one intact Norden is worth more than a squadron of captured bombers, that understanding this device could allow Germany to develop countermeasures or even copy the technology. The recovery teams receive priority for vehicles, radios, and personnel, an indication of how seriously the Luftwaffe takes this mission. The Germans quickly learn that American bombardiers take their security oaths seriously. Oberst Friedrich Roth, commanding intelligence operations for Luftflotte 3, compiles reports from recovery teams, and the pattern is depressingly consistent. Crashed bomber near Rouen, bomb site destroyed by thermite. Bomber forced down near Stuttgart, bombardier activated grenade before capture. Shot down over Hamburg, wreckage shows thermite activation despite aircraft exploding in mid-air. Roth estimates that Americans successfully destroy their Nordens in over 95% of aircraft lost, a security success rate that German intelligence finds almost unbelievable. The Americans are destroying a device worth thousands of dollars and impossible to replace, choosing total loss over any risk of capture. This tells Roth something important about how valuable the Norden must be. The Luftwaffe adapts its tactics specifically to try capturing bombers intact. Fighter pilots receive briefings from intelligence officers explaining that shooting out engines is preferable to hitting fuel tanks, that forcing bombers to crash land is more valuable than shooting them down in flames. Hauptmann Franz Stigler, an Me-109 pilot with Jagdgeschwader 27, describes the frustration of these instructions. We're supposed to fight for our lives, but also worry about keeping American bombers intact enough for the intelligence teams. It's madness. You shoot at a bomber trying to kill you. You don't think about whether you're damaging it too much for the recovery people. Despite these orders, most bombers go down burning, and even the ones that crash land usually have enough warning that bombardiers can activate thermite grenades before they fully activate. March 12, 1944. The Germans achieve a partial success near Bremen when a badly damaged B-17 crash lands and the impact throws the thermite grenade away from the Norden before it fully activates. The grenade burns through part of the device but leaves substantial sections intact.
the first time German engineers get to examine Norden components that aren't completely melted. The wreckage is rushed to a Luftwaffe technical intelligence facility outside Berlin, where a team of aeronautical engineers begins careful examination. What they find both impresses and depresses them. The Norden's gyroscope system is more sophisticated than anything Germany has developed for bomb sites. The mechanical computer uses principles German engineers understand, but executed with precision manufacturing that German industry would struggle to match even in peacetime, impossible under current bombing disruption. The autopilot integration is completely novel, something German designers never considered. Senior engineer Diplomat.Ingen Hans Müller leads the examination team and writes detailed reports on what they learn from the damaged Norden. His analysis is brutally honest. This device represents the peak of analog mechanical computation. Copying it would require manufacturing capabilities we do not currently possess, and even if we could build copies, training bombardiers to use them would take months we do not have. Muller's report notes that the automatic bomb release mechanism particularly impresses the German team. Their own Latfernrohr bomb sites require manual release, with all the reaction time errors that entails. The Norden eliminates this through electromechanical automation that's elegant in conception and execution. The report concludes that even with a complete intact specimen, Germany lacks the resources to reverse engineer and produce Norden copies in quantities that would matter. German intelligence also pursues human sources, interrogating captured American bombardiers in hopes of extracting technical information about the Norden. The interrogation center at Auswärtiges West, run by Hauptmann Hans Scharf, takes a sophisticated approach. Scharf is known for friendly interrogations rather than harsh methods, building rapport with prisoners, appealing to professional pride, engaging in technical discussions that feel like conversations between colleagues rather than enemy questioning. Lieutenant Robert Hansen, captured after his B-17 went down over France, later describes Scharf's technique. He knew everything about American bombers, could discuss formations and tactics like he'd flown them himself. When he asked about the Norden, it felt like one professional asking another about interesting equipment. But Hansen remembers his oath and the training that emphasized security over everything else. He deflects questions, gives vague answers, and refuses to discuss operational details despite Scharf's friendly manner. The most successful German intelligence operation against the Norden happens not through military action, but through pre-war espionage. Hermann Long, a German national working at the Norden factory in New York during the late 1930s, manages to photograph blueprint drawings and smuggle information back to Germany through a spy network. German intelligence celebrates this coup, believing they now have the secrets of the Norden. But when engineers attempt to build copies based on Long's stolen documents, they discover a critical problem. The blueprints are from an early prototype version, significantly less sophisticated than the production models actually being used in combat. The gyroscope system is simpler, the mechanical computer mechanisms less refined, and the autopilot integration doesn't exist in the version Long photographed. Germany spent considerable resources building copies of an obsolete design, producing bomb sites no better than their existing Latfernrohr models. By late 1944, German efforts to capture or copy the Norden effectively cease as the military situation deteriorates too much for technological pursuits to matter. The recovery teams are disbanded, their vehicles and personnel reassigned to more immediate needs. The examination facilities are evacuated as Allied armies approach from east and west. Oberst Roth, reviewing the entire program in his final report, concludes that the Americans have achieved a security success unprecedented in military history, protecting a device so thoroughly that even Germany's intensive efforts recovered nothing of value. But Roth also notes the irony that even if Germany had captured perfect Norden specimens in 1942, it probably wouldn't have mattered. By the time copies could be produced and bombardiers trained, the Luftwaffe had lost air superiority over Europe. The Norden only works when you control the sky, and Germany no longer does. The final assessment of the German hunt for the Norden reveals something important about technology in warfare. The device itself was revolutionary, but it existed within a system that made it effective. American bombardiers who could use it, bombers that could carry it to targets, fighters that could protect those bombers, industrial capacity that could produce both Nordens and aircraft in quantity. Germany lacked most of these prerequisites by the time they understood what the Norden was. Even perfect specimens captured intact in 1942.
June 1945, Washington, D.C. Dr. Paul Nitze sits in his office at the United States Strategic Bombing Survey headquarters, staring at statistics that contradict everything the American public believes about the Norden bombsight. Nitze's team has spent months in Germany examining factory records, interviewing survivors, analyzing thousands of reconnaissance photos. The numbers are undeniable and deeply uncomfortable. Average bombing accuracy across all missions, all conditions, all targets is approximately 1,200 feet from the aiming point. Only 20% of bombs dropped landed within 1,000 feet of intended targets. The pickle barrel myth, the claim that Norden-equipped bombers could drop bombs into containers from 6 miles up, is revealed as propaganda so divorced from reality that Nitze considers it embarrassing. But the report's conclusions are more nuanced than simple failure. Despite accuracy far below promises, the bombing campaign significantly damaged German war production. The Norden wasn't the miracle weapon of legend, but it was good enough to contribute meaningfully to victory. The pickle barrel story deserves its own examination because it became the defining myth of the Norden, repeated in newspapers, magazines, training films, and recruiting posters across America. The phrase originated innocently enough from training demonstrations where instructors would joke about bombardiers dropping practice bombs close enough to land in a barrel. Army Air Force's public relations officers seized on this colorful image and transformed it into a literal claim, telling the American public that precision bombing meant exactly that: bombs through barrel-sized openings from 30,000 feet. By 1943, millions of Americans believed this was routine, that every mission featured surgical strikes hitting exactly what bombardiers aimed at. The myth served multiple purposes, justifying the enormous expense of the Norden program, boosting morale, and intimidating enemies. But it created expectations that combat could never meet. Lieutenant Richard Anderson, the bombardier whose story we've followed through this narrative, reads about the Strategic Bombing Survey's findings in Stars and Stripes newspaper during his occupation duty in Germany. He's not surprised by the accuracy statistics because he lived them, knows from personal experience that hitting within 1,200 feet was often an achievement under combat conditions. What surprises him is seeing it documented officially, the gap between training promises and combat reality acknowledged in writing. Anderson writes in a letter to his family back home that the Norden was the best tool available for an impossible job. We did our best with what we had, and apparently our best was good enough to win. That's all that really matters. His view represents the attitude of most combat veterans, men who understand that wars are won by soldiers doing difficult jobs with imperfect tools, not by miracle weapons that solve all problems. The strategic impact of the Norden, divorced from mythology, proves substantial when examined objectively. German production records captured after the war show clear patterns of damage to critical industries. Ball bearing production from Schweinfurt dropped by 38% following sustained attacks.
synthetic oil refineries operated at only 60% of capacity by late 1944 due to precision bombing of critical components. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, testified after the war that American precision bombing forced Germany to disperse industry at enormous cost, diverting resources from weapons production to factory relocation. These effects resulted from bombing that was imprecise by Norden's promised standards, but precise enough to target specific industrial complexes rather than entire cities. Carl Norden himself lived until 1965, long enough to see his invention become obsolete and to witness the beginning of the precision-guided weapon era that would finally deliver the accuracy he promised. He rarely gave interviews and never publicly commented on the gap between his bombsight's theoretical and actual performance. Colleagues described him as convinced that bombardiers could have achieved better accuracy with more training and practice, an engineer's perspective that ignored combat realities. The U.S. government paid Norden and his company millions in contracts, making him wealthy. But the fame he might have expected never materialized because the device remained classified until 1947. By the time declassification happened, the Norden was already becoming obsolete, superseded by radar bombing systems and early guided weapons. The financial cost of the Norden program exceeded $6 billion in today's money, making it one of the three most expensive weapons programs of World War II, alongside the Manhattan Project and B-29 development. Was it worth this enormous investment? Military historians still debate this question. The Norden provided a capability that contributed to winning the war, giving American bombers an accuracy that enemies couldn't match. But the same resources might have produced more aircraft, more bombs, or better training. The counterfactual question, what if America had invested differently, remains unanswerable. What's clear is that the Norden's greatest value may have been psychological and strategic rather than purely tactical. The reputation for precision, even when exaggerated, forced German defensive measures that proved costly and inefficient. Fear of the Norden's capabilities had its own military value. The modern era of precision-guided munitions represents the fulfillment of Carl Norden's original vision. Today's joint direct attack munition can strike within 15 feet of its target from any altitude in any weather, day or night. This is the precision Norden promised but couldn't deliver with 1930s mechanical technology. Interestingly, modern weapons achieve this using principles Norden understood. Inertial guidance systems descended from his gyroscopes, automated release based on ballistic calculations, the concept of removing human error from the release sequence. The technology evolved from mechanical to electronic to digital, but the underlying concepts remain Norden's contributions. He was right about what needed to be done, just born too early to have the technology to do it properly. The Norden remained in U.S. military service until the 1960s, used in Korea and in early Vietnam operations before being finally retired as hopelessly obsolete. The last combat use reportedly occurred in 1967 aboard an A-1 Skyraider, an obsolete aircraft using an obsolete bombsight in a war rapidly moving toward laser-guided bombs and electronic warfare. The Norden had gone from America's most guarded secret to a museum piece in just 25 years, testament to how rapidly military technology evolved in the mid-20th century. When security classification was finally lifted in 1947, Nordens began appearing in surplus sales, military museums, and eventually private collections. Modern engineers examining these devices express universal respect for the mechanical sophistication, recognizing the Norden as analog computing at its absolute peak. Staff Sergeant Tom Mitchell, the maintenance technician whose expertise kept Nordens operational through harsh conditions, attended a bomber veteran reunion in 1985 where he met several bombardiers he had served with. They discussed the Norden with the affection veterans feel for equipment that brought them home alive, even while acknowledging its limitations. Mitchell recalled that the most remarkable thing about the Norden was not its accuracy, but its reliability. Considering what we subjected those devices to, the cold, the vibration, the combat damage, it's amazing they worked as often as they did. Mechanical devices with 2,000 moving parts operating at -40 degrees while being shot at. The fact that they usually worked is the real achievement. This perspective from men who lived with the Norden daily provides perhaps the most honest assessment of its capabilities. The final verdict on the Norden Bombsight must acknowledge both its genuine achievements and its oversold reputation. It was the most sophisticated bombing technology of World War II, giving American bombers a real advantage. It represented mechanical engineering at its absolute peak, earning respect across generations. But it was also overhyped, overclassified, and over-mythologized. The pickle barrel stories were propaganda. The security obsession, while understandable, may have been excessive, given that even when Germany captured partial examples, they couldn't replicate the technology. The Norden didn't revolutionize warfare as promised, but it contributed meaningfully to winning the war. It wasn't the miracle weapon of legend, but it was the best bombsight of its era. In a conflict where margins mattered, where thousands of missions accumulated over years, that advantage proved significant. The 50 pounds of gears and gyroscopes that bombardiers swore to protect with their lives didn't change warfare forever, but it helped win the greatest conflict the world had ever seen. For the men who flew with it, aimed through it, maintained it, and died protecting it, perhaps that legacy is enough.